Imagine you're a horrified courtier in Westminster Palace in 1547, where the stench of rotting flesh from King Henry VIII's swollen body spreads like a deadly curse. Pus oozes from his ulcers. Dried blood clings to the sheets, and his mind, once that of a golden prince, now plunges into an abyss of paranoia, haunted by the ghosts of his 6 wives, betrayed, beheaded, or dying in agony. He tore apart the church, bathed in the blood of thousands of enemies, and turned England into hell itself, all driven by a mad lust, a male heir to defeat the curse of infertility. This isn't glamorous royalty. This is a blood-soaked nightmare about how sexual fear and power can devour an empire, leaving a legacy of corpses and chaos. But before we dive deep into these gruesome secrets, if you're obsessed with dark history full of scandals, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Comment below, do you think Henry was a hero or a bloodthirsty monster? It's astonishing how we connect across time to peel back these horrors. To understand Henry VIII, we must start with the genetic curse of the Tudor dynasty, a bloodline steeped in blood and intrigue, where the lack of a son wasn't just tragedy, but a summons to hell itself. Henry VIII was born on June 28, 1491, at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, a sprawling riverside fortress that seemed more like a fairy tale castle than the cradle of a cursed bloodline. Picture it, the Tudor dynasty, forged in the fires of the Wars of the Roses, where cousins slaughtered cousins for the throne, and now this new royal house teetered on the edge of oblivion. Henry's father, Henry VII, was no benevolent king. He was a shrewd survivor, a man who clawed his way to power through battlefield cunning and strategic marriages, all while hoarding gold like a dragon guarding its treasure. His mother, Elizabeth of York, brought the white rose of her house into this union, but their children were pawns in a deadly game of survival. From the start, fate toyed with the Tudors. Henry was the second son, not destined for the crown, at least not at first. His older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, was the golden heir, groomed from birth to rule. But the family was plagued by loss. Out of 6 or perhaps 7 siblings, only 3 survived infancy: Arthur, the elder sister Margaret, and the younger Mary. The palace halls echoed with the ghosts of lost infants, a grim reminder of the fragility of royal blood. Henry, spared this early doom, grew up in a world of privilege shadowed by paranoia. His father, ever the miser and manipulator, bestowed titles on him like chains of control: Constable of Dover Castle at just 2 years old, Duke of York in 1494, and Warden of the Scottish Marches by 1495. These weren't mere honours. They were tools to secure the kingdom's borders and quell rebellions, teaching young Henry that power was a weapon to be wielded without mercy. As a boy, Henry was a marvel, a living embodiment of Renaissance ideals. Athletic and towering, with a frame built for jousting and hunting, he dashed through the forests with bow in hand, his laughter ringing like victory bells. Intellectually, he shone brighter than any star in the Tudor sky. Fluent in Latin, French, and a smattering of Italian, he composed music that could move courtiers to tears, wrote poetry that rivaled the bards, and delved into theology with the zeal of a monk. He was pious too, attending Mass with fervent devotion, his youthful face aglow with faith. Chronicles describe him as intellectual and pious, a prince who could debate scholars one moment and outride knights the next. But beneath this golden facade lurked the curse, the ever-present fear that the Tudor line, so precariously won, could vanish in a single generation without a strong male heir. The turning point came in 1501, when Henry, just 10 years old, witnessed the grand spectacle of his brother's wedding to Catherine of Aragon. It was a match made for empires, the Spanish princess, with her auburn hair and royal poise, arriving to seal an alliance against France. The celebrations were lavish: tournaments, feasts, and fireworks lighting up the night sky like omens. But joy turned to horror when Arthur, frail and sickly, died mere months later in 1502, struck down by a mysterious illness that some whispered was the sweat or tuberculosis. Suddenly, Henry was thrust into the role of Prince of Wales by 1504, the weight of the crown pressing down like an iron yoke. His father, sensing the dynasty's vulnerability, wasted no time arranging Henry's future. In 1503, a treaty was signed for him to marry Catherine, his brother's widow, a union that reeked of political expediency but carried a biblical shadow. Whispers of Leviticus 20:21 echoed in the corridors. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless. The marriage was delayed. Henry was too young, and the death of Catherine's mother, Isabella I of Castile, in 1504, complicated the dowry. Yet, as Henry matured into a strapping teenager, the seeds of obsession were sown. The Tudor curse wasn't just about death, it was about legacy. Without sons, the throne would crumble into civil war. And Henry, watching his father's iron-fisted rule, learned early that mercy was a weakness. Little did he know, this union with Catherine would ignite a firestorm of lust, betrayal, and bloodshed that would consume everything in its path. As Henry VII drew his final ragged breath in April 1509, the kingdom held its collective breath, unaware that the Golden Prince ascending the throne would soon unleash a storm of ambition, lust, and terror. At just 17, Henry VIII burst onto the scene like a comet, vibrant, charismatic, and hungry for glory. His coronation on June 24th at Westminster Abbey was a spectacle of opulence, trumpets blaring, crowds cheering as he and his new bride paraded through streets lined with tapestries and flowers. But this wasn't just a ceremony, it was the ignition of a powder keg. Henry had married Catherine of Aragon on June 11th in a private ceremony at Greenwich, claiming it fulfilled his father's dying wish. Yet whispers of doubt lingered. Had the papal dispensation truly cleansed the sin of wedding his brother's widow? Leviticus 20:21 loomed like a dark cloud. If a man shall take his brother's wife, they shall be childless. For now, though, the early days were a whirlwind of joy. Catherine, radiant and devoted, described their life as one of continuous festival. Jousts, masques, and feasts, where Henry dazzled as the epitome of Renaissance kingship. But beneath the revelry, Henry's true nature began to emerge, sharp as a hidden blade. He wasted no time purging the old guard, those ministers who had enforced his father's harsh taxes. Richard Empson and Edmund Dudley, once powerful enforcers, were arrested and executed in 1510, their heads rolling as a crowd roared approval. It was a calculated move. Henry positioned himself as the people's king, returning confiscated funds and pardoning some Yorkist rebels. Yet, mercy had limits. In 1513, he ordered the beheading of Edmund de la Pole, a potential claimant to the throne, sending a chilling message. Cross the Tudors, and your blood would stain the scaffold. These acts weren't mere justice. They were the first cracks in the facade, revealing a ruler who craved absolute control, his paranoia inherited from his father now blooming into something far more dangerous. Catherine's role in these early triumphs only deepened the illusion of bliss. As Henry turned his gaze outward, dreaming of continental glory, she proved a steadfast partner. Foreign policy became his playground, a series of bold alliances and wars to assert England's might. In 1511, he joined the Holy League under Pope Julius II, allying with Ferdinand II of Aragon, Catherine's father, against France. The 1512 invasion faltered, but Henry rallied. By 1513, he personally led troops across the Channel, capturing Terouanne and Tournai in the Battle of the Spurs, a swift victory that earned him knightly fame. Meanwhile, back home, Catherine, swollen with yet another ill-fated pregnancy, crushed a Scottish invasion at Flodden Field, where King James IV fell in a hail of arrows, his body mangled beyond recognition. The triumph was sweet, but costly. England's coffers drained, and the seeds of financial ruin were sown. Peace with France came in 1514, sealed by his sister Mary's marriage to Louis XII, but it was fleeting. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry's brilliant chancellor, orchestrated the Treaty of London in 1518, a grand pact against the Ottomans that positioned England as Europe's peacemaker. Yet, ambition burned hotter. In 1520, Henry met Francis III at the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a lavish extravaganza of tents embroidered in gold, jousts, and feasts that cost a fortune but masked bitter rivalry. Alliances shifted like sand. By 1521, Henry sided with Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew, against France again, only for Charles's victory at Pavia in 1525 to leave England sidelined and broke. Amid these power plays, the curse struck at home. Catherine's pregnancies, 6 in total, ended in heartbreak. Stillborn daughters, sons who gasped for life only to fade. A boy in 1511 survived mere weeks. Others followed in 1513 and 1514, their tiny coffins a grim procession. Only Mary, born in 1516, lived, but a daughter wasn't enough for Henry's ego or the dynasty's survival. Whispers grew. Was this divine punishment for the forbidden marriage? Henry, once pious, began to twist scripture to his will, fixating on Leviticus as proof their union was unclean. His eye wandered to mistresses like Elizabeth Blount, who bore him an illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, in 1519. But bastards couldn't inherit. He needed legitimate heirs, and frustration festered into obsession. By 1527, the storm broke. Henry fell madly for Anne Boleyn, a sharp-witted courtier with dark eyes and a neck that would one day meet the axe. She refused to be a mere mistress, demanding marriage. Henry, convinced Catherine's barrenness doomed the realm, sought an annulment. He bombarded Pope Clement VII with pleas, citing the biblical curse, but the Pope, captive to Charles V after the sack of Rome, denied him. Wolsey, tasked with securing the divorce, failed spectacularly and fell from grace in 1529, his downfall a prelude to greater carnage. Enter Thomas Cromwell, the cunning lawyer who became Henry's hatchet man. Cromwell whispered of radical solutions, break from Rome entirely. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy declared Henry supreme head of the Church of England, shattering centuries of papal authority. It was heresy wrapped in royal decree, but Henry reveled in it. Once dubbed Defender of the Faith by Pope Leo X in 1521 for his anti-Luther writings, he now burned heretics while seizing church wealth. The dissolution of the monasteries from 1536 to 1539 was a looting spree. Over 800 abbeys razed, treasures funneled to the crown, monks scattered or executed. Blood flowed. Pilgrims rebelling in the north met the noose, their leaders' heads spiked on gates. Henry's personal life mirrored this chaos. Secretly wedding Anne in January 1533, she gave birth to Elizabeth in September. A girl, another failure. Anne's miscarriages in 1534 and 1536 sealed her fate. Henry accused her of adultery and incest, fantasies born of paranoia. In May 1536, she knelt at the Tower of London, her head severed by a French swordsman in one clean stroke. Imagine the scene, the crowd gasping as blood sprayed, Henry already plotting his next conquest, his heart as cold as the executioner's blade. Mere days later, he married Jane Seymour, a demure lady-in-waiting. Their union in 1536 brought fleeting joy. Edward VI, born in 1537, the longed-for son. But triumph turned to tragedy. Jane died of puerperal fever days later, her body ravaged, leaving Henry to mourn his true wife amid growing isolation. Undeterred, Henry sought alliances abroad. In 1540, he wed Anne of Cleves for a Protestant pact, but revulsion struck. He called her a Flanders mare, their marriage unconsummated. His impotence whispered in shadows. Annulment followed swiftly, sparing her life but humiliating him further. Youth tempted him next. Catherine Howard, a vivacious 17-year-old, married in 1540. But her affairs with courtiers like Thomas Culpeper surfaced, igniting Henry's rage. In 1542, she faced the block, screaming denials as the axe fell, her blood mingling with Anne's ghosts. Finally, in 1543, Catherine Parr, a wise widow, became his sixth wife. She navigated his moods with skill, educating his children and narrowly escaping arrest for heresy in 1546. Yet, Henry's paranoia festered. He saw plots everywhere, executing 72,000 souls under charges of treason and heresy, turning England into a slaughterhouse. Through it all, the marriages weren't just personal failures, they were the fuse for national cataclysm. Henry's quest for heirs birthed the English Reformation, a schism that would echo through centuries of religious war. His children, Mary the Catholic zealot, Elizabeth the enigmatic Protestant, Edward the frail heir, bore the scars of his obsessions. What began as a young king's dream unraveled into a reign of terror, where love twisted into execution and faith became a weapon. As Henry's personal hell of marriages and reformations raged on, the flames leaped beyond the palace walls, engulfing the entire kingdom in a maelstrom of war, intrigue, and iron-fisted control. What began as a king's desperate quest for a son had metastasized into a national nightmare, where foreign battlefields ran red with English blood, and domestic halls echoed with the screams of the condemned. The once golden monarch, now scarred by betrayal and bloating with age, channeled his inner demons outward, forging policies that would reshape Europe while dragging his realm to the edge of ruin. Picture it, a tyrant whose bedroom failures fueled global ambitions, turning diplomacy into a deadly game and reform into ruthless domination. Foreign affairs became Henry's arena for proving his virility on the world stage, a brutal extension of his domestic obsessions. No longer content with church schisms and scaffold spectacles, he hurled England into continental conflicts, dreaming of eclipsing the glories of his ancestors. Early on, his alliance with Catherine's father, Ferdinand II of Aragon, set the tone for bloodshed. In 1511, Henry joined the Holy League, a papal crusade against France that promised holy victory but delivered only carnage. The 1512 invasion was a fiasco, ships wrecked, men drowned in mud. But Henry, ever the showman, rallied for 1513. Leading his troops personally, armored like a god of war, he stormed across the Channel, crushing French forces at the Battle of the Spurs and seizing Terouanne and Tournai. The air filled with the clang of steel and the cries of the dying as English arrows rained down like divine judgment. Back home, Catherine, swollen with yet another ill-fated pregnancy, orchestrated a triumph of her own, repelling a Scottish invasion at Flodden Field, where King James IV's body was hacked to pieces, his royal blood soaking the earth in a gruesome tableau that Henry celebrated as proof of his destined greatness. Yet, peace was as fleeting as his heirs' lives. The 1514 treaty with France, sealed by his sister Mary's marriage to the aging Louis XII, crumbled like ash. Wolsey, that silver-tongued architect of illusions, brokered the Treaty of London in 1518, a grand illusion of European unity against the Ottomans, with England at its heart. But rivalry festered. In 1520, Henry met Francis III at the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a fortnight of excess where golden tents glittered under the sun, wrestlers grappled in mock combat, and fountains flowed with wine. It was a masquerade of friendship, but beneath the silk and jewels lurked hatred. Henry and Francis, both alpha kings, sizing each other up like predators. The cost: a king's ransom, bleeding the treasury dry while achieving nothing but envy. Alliances shifted with the winds of Henry's whims. By 1521, he sided with Emperor Charles V against France once more, only for Charles's crushing victory at Pavia in 1525 to leave England isolated, its coffers empty, and soldiers weary. Decades later, in 1543, Henry reignited the Italian War, allying with Charles again to seize Boulogne in 1544. a Pyrrhic triumph amid fields of mutilated corpses. The peace of 1546 came at a staggering £750,000, a fortune squandered on glory that slipped through his fingers like blood from a wound. And Scotland? Oh, the rough wooing was a saga of savagery. After routing the Scots at Solway Moss in 1542, where their king died of grief, Henry unleashed hell to force a marriage between his son Edward and the infant Mary, Queen of Scots. Villages burned, children orphaned, borders turned to ash in a campaign of terror that scarred the North for generations. These wars weren't strategy. They were extensions of Henry's paranoia, his fear of weakness mirrored in endless conquests that masked his inner decay. At home, Henry's reforms were no less brutal, a domestic purge that centralized power in his bloated hands while crushing dissent underfoot. He preached the divine right of kings, positioning himself as God's anointed, above Pope or Parliament. Bills of attainder became his favorite weapon, legal shortcuts to condemn enemies without trial, their fates sealed by royal whim alone. In 1536, the Laws in Wales Act swallowed Wales whole, integrating it into England like a predator devouring prey, erasing ancient customs in a stroke of the quill. By 1542, the Crown of Ireland Act transformed him from mere lord to King of Ireland, summoning Gaelic chieftains to a puppet parliament where they bowed or bled. Thomas Cromwell, the mastermind behind these machinations, was hailed by some as a visionary. Geoffrey Elton called Henry shrewd but lacking vision, yet Cromwell supplied it, streamlining bureaucracy and redistributing monastery lands to loyal nobles. But loyalty was fickle. In 1540, Henry turned on Cromwell, accusing him of treason and heresy, his head rolling as a warning to all. The English Reformation's aftermath fueled this tyranny. Having seized church wealth, Henry built a navy from 5 ships to 53, ironclad behemoths that projected power across the seas. Yet the cost was cataclysmic. Inflation soared as war debts mounted. Peasants starved while courtiers feasted, and religious strife ignited like wildfire. Catholics and Protestants alike faced the stake. Henry burned heretics with glee, his once pious soul twisted into fanaticism. As historian A.F. Pollard noted, these reforms led England down the road to parliamentary democracy and empire. But the path was paved with skulls. In his later years, the monster fully emerged. From the 1530s onward, Henry's body betrayed him, a grotesque balloon of flesh, his legs ulcerated and festering, forcing him to be carried like a bloated idol. Obesity gripped him, perhaps from overindulgence or the curse's final twist, rendering him impotent and immobile. Paranoia consumed him. He saw plots in every shadow, executing friends and foes alike. Diplomatic missions, like Lord Rochford's to France in 1534, amid Anne's troubled pregnancy, reeked of desperation, spies reporting whispers of his failures. By the 1540s, cabinet meetings devolved into rants, his voice thundering accusations while his frame wheezed in pain. The kingdom mirrored its king. Finances in tatters, colonies stirring with unrest, and religious divides festering like open wounds. As the shadows of Henry's decaying reign lengthened, his body finally surrendered to the very curse that had haunted him, a grotesque symphony of pain and regret that echoed through the halls of Whitehall. Picture the scene. The once mighty king, now a wheezing hulk confined to his bed, his legs a festering mess of ulcers that wept pus like tears from hell itself. Gout ravaged him, his flesh swollen and inflamed, each breath a labored gasp amid the stench of impending death. On January 28, 1547, at the age of 55, Henry VIII slipped away in London, his final whispers lost to history. Perhaps pleas for forgiveness, or curses against the fates that denied him a robust legacy of sons. Official records blamed gout and related ailments, but whispers in the court spoke of a soul consumed by its own poisons. Decades of gluttony, rage, and unquenched lust finally exacting their toll. He was buried beside Jane Seymour at Windsor Castle, the only wife he deemed true, their tombs a silent testament to fleeting joy amid endless sorrow. But death didn't end the drama. It merely passed the torch to a fragile boy, setting the stage for more Tudor turmoil. Edward VI, Henry's long-awaited son, ascended at just 9 years old, a pale, pious child whose reign promised reform but delivered only brevity. Guided by Protestant regents, he pushed the Reformation further, stripping altars and enforcing prayer books, but his frail health mirrored the dynasty's curse. Tuberculosis claimed him at 15, plunging England into the fiery zeal of Mary VIII, Henry's firstborn daughter, the Bloody Mary, who burned hundreds at the stake in a bid to restore Catholicism, her mother's Spanish faith fueling a reign of terror. Then came Elizabeth I, the enigmatic Virgin Queen, whose golden age of exploration and arts built on her father's fractured foundation, defeating armadas and forging an empire. Yet, even in triumph, the scars remained. No heirs from Elizabeth either, ending the Tudor line in 1603 and ushering in the Stuarts. Henry's children weren't just successors, they were living echoes of his obsessions. Mary's fanaticism born of neglect, Elizabeth's cunning forged in survival, Edward's piety a fragile shield against the void. And what of Henry's legacy? Oh, viewer, it's a double-edged sword, dripping with blood and ambition, a story that still sends shivers down spines centuries later. He played a pivotal role in the English Reformation, wrenching England from Rome's grasp and birthing a Protestant powerhouse that would challenge Catholic empires across the seas. His centralization of power, swallowing Wales, claiming Ireland, building a navy of iron giants, paved the way for Britain's imperial rise, as historians like A.F. Pollard noted, leading down the road to parliamentary democracy and empire. Yet the cost was apocalyptic. 72,000 executions under his rule, a reign of terror where friends became foes overnight, and religious divisions that ignited wars for generations. Books like Alison Weir's Henry VIII, The King and His Court peel back the layers, revealing a man of dazzling intellect twisted into tyranny, while Tracy Borman's Henry VIII and the Men Who Made Him exposes the sycophants who enabled his descent into madness. In the end, Henry VIII stands as a ghastly cautionary tale, a king whose personal fears metastasized into national catastrophe, devouring wives, subjects, and faith in a frenzy of power and paranoia. He reshaped history, yes, but at what price? A kingdom scarred by schism, a dynasty doomed by its own bloodlust. Imagine if he'd found peace with one heir, one faithful union. Would Europe have burned differently? That's the hook that keeps us coming back to these dark chapters, isn't it? The what-ifs that make history alive and terrifying. Thank you for joining this blood-soaked journey through Henry's horrors. If this tale of doomed wives and tyrant kings has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe for more dark history scandals that will keep you up at night. Drop a comment. Was Henry a visionary builder of empires, or just a monster in a crown? Your thoughts fuel the fire. Let's uncover more secrets together next time.